The rain beat a relentless rhythm on the Mercedes windshield, but it was the cold, unfamiliar edge in Nathan Sinclair's voice that truly cut Miranda. "You need a lesson in respect, Mother." 65 years had etched lines of resilience onto her face, seen her through countless storms. Yet the transformation of her once-loving son into this stranger behind the wheel filled her with a terror no physical danger ever had. They were driving back from Robert's grave, a solemn ritual on the 3rd anniversary of his passing. What should have been a hallowed moment of shared remembrance had, predictably, curdled into another bitter argument about Sinclair Motors, Nathan callously dismissing her concerns about the company's spiraling finances. "Pull over, Nathan," Miranda commanded, her voice a thin wire pulled taut, defying the growing knot of dread in her stomach. "Let's discuss this rationally when we're both calmer." "There's nothing to discuss." His knuckles, white as bone, gripped the steering wheel. "You've been undermining me at every board meeting, questioning decisions you don't understand. The company has moved beyond your outdated ideas." In the passenger seat, Victor Reed, Nathan's new CFO and ever-present shadow, maintained a perfectly neutral facade. But Miranda caught the fleeting, almost imperceptible upturn at the corner of his slick mouth, a flicker of predatory satisfaction. She disliked Victor since their first meeting, sensing something reptilian beneath his polished credentials and carefully curated charm. Without warning, the car swerved violently onto the gravel shoulder of the rural highway, tires spitting muddy water into the incessant downpour. They were 50 miles from home, surrounded by nothing but the dripping silhouette of ancient forest and a sky the color of bruised slate. "Get out!" Nathan didn't even look at her as the locks clicked open. "What?" Miranda stared, disbelief warring with a rising tide of panic. "Nathan, it's pouring and we're miles from anywhere." "Perhaps some time to reflect on your position will help you understand things more clearly." His voice had adopted that patronizing lilt she'd come to despise, the one that diminished her to a confused old woman rather than the co-founder of a multi-million-dollar automotive empire. Victor, finally breaking his silence, offered, "Nathan, perhaps this is—" "No." Nathan cut him off, his eyes like chips of granite as he turned to Miranda. "She needs to understand that she can't control everything anymore. Out. Now." Miranda recognized the futility of further argument. With a dignity that belied the maelstrom in her gut, she gathered her purse and opened the door. The rain immediately soaked through her light jacket as she stepped onto the muddy verge. "You'll regret this," she stated quietly, not a threat, but a cold, hard fact settling in the air between them. Nathan's response was a roar of the engine, the Mercedes accelerating away, spraying a curtain of dirty water onto her already drenched clothes. Miranda watched the taillights vanish around a distant curve, standing perfectly still, rain streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. For 3 years since Robert's death, she had watched her son change, observed Victor's tightening grip. She had retreated, granted Nathan space to assert himself as CEO, ignored the multiplying red flags. She'd told herself it was grief, adjustment, the crushing weight of new responsibility, anything but the truth now staring her down. Her son had become someone she no longer recognized. The road stretched empty, a ribbon of wet asphalt under a lowering sky. Cell reception was a ghost out here. Miranda huddled beneath a large pine, the dense needles offering scant, temporary reprieve. It wasn't the isolation or the weather that truly frightened her. It was the chilling clarity that her son could abandon his own mother on a deserted road without a moment of hesitation. 10 minutes crawled by, the rain a steady drum against the forest canopy. Then a distinct rumble broke the monotony, not the sleek purr of Nathan's Mercedes, but the deeper growl of a larger engine. A black pickup truck slowed beside her, its wipers fighting the deluge. The passenger window hummed down, revealing a weathered face Miranda hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. "Need a ride, Mrs. Sinclair?" James Reeves asked, his tone so utterly casual it was as if they'd arranged this meeting. Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over Miranda, immediately followed by the prickle of suspicion. "James, what are you doing here?" The former military man, Robert's most trusted colleague during their special operations days and later head of security for Sinclair Motors, offered a slight smile. "Let's get you out of this rain first. Explanations can wait." Miranda climbed into the warm cab, accepting the towel James offered. "This isn't a coincidence." "No, ma'am." James kept his eyes on the road as he pulled back onto the highway. "Robert asked me to keep an eye on you. Said there might come a day you'd need backup." "Robert's been gone 3 years," Miranda whispered, studying his profile. "You've been watching me all this time." "Not constantly." James navigated the slick road with practiced ease. "But I've been monitoring the situation at Sinclair Motors. Your son's new friend has quite the interesting background. One he's gone to great lengths to obscure." A chill, utterly unrelated to her soaked clothes, snaked down Miranda's spine. "Tell me everything." "Robert suspected something was wrong with Nathan's finances before he died," James began, his voice low. "Asked me to investigate quietly." He reached into his jacket pocket, handing her a small USB drive. "Everything's here. Nathan's gambling debts, failed investments, the money he's been borrowing from increasingly dangerous people, Victor's pattern of targeting vulnerable executives and taking over their companies. Robert was collecting evidence when his heart gave out." "Why didn't he tell me?" Miranda whispered, clutching the small device, her throat tight. "He planned to, once he had all the facts. He didn't want to worry you with suspicions." James glanced at her, his gaze steady. "Before he died, he made me promise to watch over you, to be ready when you needed me." Miranda stared out at the rain-lashed landscape, feeling an almost forgotten sensation stir within her. A hardening, a resolve crystallizing after years of compromise and retreat. "Nathan thinks he taught me a lesson today," she said finally, her voice imbued with an edge James hadn't heard since their battlefield days. "But he's the one who's about to learn something." James nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "What's our next move?" "Take me home," Miranda commanded, straightening in her seat. "I need to change into dry clothes. Then we're going to visit Robert's old study. There are documents there, contingencies he put in place that Nathan knows nothing about." As the truck continued through the storm, Miranda felt a resurgence of that calm, focused clarity that always preceded decisive action. Nathan's cruel abandonment wasn't just a betrayal. It was his last, gravest mistake. The son who had left her in the rain had no idea who his mother truly was or what she was capable of, and it was finally time to remind him. Robert Sinclair's private study remained exactly as he'd left it 3 years prior. Miranda had refused to allow anyone to alter it, preserving his sanctuary as a silent memorial. Now, as she entered the wood-panelled room, James trailing respectfully behind, the space took on a new significance. No longer merely a shrine, but an arsenal for the battle ahead. "Robert kept everything meticulously organized," Miranda said, moving toward the vast mahogany desk that dominated the room. Her still damp hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, business attire replacing her soaked clothes. His public files were impeccable, but the real records were always hidden. James watched as Miranda knelt beside an antique globe in the corner, rotating its axis. "Military habits die hard," he observed. Indeed. Miranda entered a 6-digit code their wedding anniversary, followed by the coordinates of their first classified meeting. The globe's base hummed, sliding open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope. Her name penned in Robert's distinctive hand. She removed both, placing them reverently on the desk. Robert always had contingency plans. It's how he survived 30 years in special operations before we retired to build Sinclair Motors. He never truly retired from strategic thinking. Even as a businessman, James affirmed, he operated like we were still in the field identifying threats, securing assets, planning for worst-case scenarios. Miranda opened the ledger first, revealing pages of Robert's precise handwriting. Observations about Nathan's behavior dating back 5 years, detailed notes on suspicious financial transactions, and profiles of individuals who had infiltrated Nathan's orbit. Victor Reed featured most prominently. He knew, Miranda whispered, scanning the pages, a cold knot forming in her stomach. He saw Nathan changing before I did. Robert noticed patterns others missed, James confirmed. About 6 months before he died, he asked me to quietly investigate Nathan's finances. What I found disturbed us both. Your son had accumulated massive gambling debts, high-stakes poker, sports betting, risky market speculation. He'd lost millions, borrowing from increasingly questionable sources to cover his tracks. Miranda continued turning pages, her expression growing grimmer with each entry. And, Victor, how does he fit into this? Victor Reed specializes in identifying wealthy businesses with vulnerable leadership, James explained, stepping closer and pointing to a particular entry. He appeared in Nathan's life right when the debts became unmanageable, positioning himself as a financial savior. Robert tracked Victor's previous partnerships. The pattern is consistent. He finds desperate executives, offers solutions that gradually transfer control of their companies to him, then discards them once he has what he wants. Miranda sank heavily into Robert's chair, the weight of the betrayal crushing her. Why didn't Robert confront Nathan? His health was already failing, James said gently, and confrontation would have driven Nathan further into Victor's influence. Instead, Robert focused on protecting you and the company's future. The sealed envelope felt cool in Miranda's steady hands, the crisp paper a stark contrast to the rough wax seal bearing Robert's distinctive crest. As her thumb broke the hardened wax, a faint crack echoed in the hushed room. Inside, a letter lay nestled amongst a stack of legal documents. "My dearest Miranda," the elegant script began, each stroke a poignant whisper from beyond the grave. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And circumstances have forced you to seek answers I should have shared while I could. Forgive me this final secret. I wanted to shield you from worry during whatever time we had left together." A heavy sigh escaped Miranda's lips, her gaze unfocused for a moment, lost in the phantom embrace of a love long held. "Our son is in trouble." The stark truth snapped her back to the page. "The details are in my notes, but the essence is simple. Nathan has developed a gambling addiction that has compromised his judgment and finances. The man calling himself Victor Reed, not his real name, is exploiting this vulnerability to gain control of our company." A tremor ran through Miranda, but her hand remained firm. Robert, ever the strategist, had anticipated this. "I've prepared for this contingency." The words were a lifeline. The attached documents include amendments to our corporate structure that I quietly implemented before my health declined. On paper, Nathan appears to have full control as CEO, but the true power remains with you through a series of holding companies and legal structures that only you, as my widow, can activate. Her eyes scanned the next line, a name that brought a flicker of reassurance. "James Reeves has been my eyes and ears. Trust him as I have always trusted him since our days in service together, through the building of our civilian life, and now as your protector, in my absence." Robert's foresight was breathtaking. Nathan may need to fall before he can rise again. This will hurt you watching our son fail, but sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing consequences to unfold. Be strong, as you have always been. All my love, for all time, Robert. Miranda read the letter twice more, letting the weight of Robert's words settle, then meticulously examined the accompanying legal papers. He had woven an intricate web, an elaborate safety net designed to give Nathan the illusion of ultimate authority while reserving Miranda's power to reclaim control when the time was right. "Did you know about these arrangements?" she asked James, who had entered silently, his presence a solid anchor in the turbulent room. His weathered face softened. a rare crack in his usual stoic demeanour. Not the specifics. Robert kept the legal details private, but he made me promise to stay close, to be ready when you needed support. James paused, his gaze meeting hers directly. His last words to me, the day before he died, were about you. He said, when Miranda finally sees what's happening, she'll need allies who remember who she truly is. Miranda stood, straightening to her full height, a subtle shift in her posture. And who did Robert think I truly am? The woman who out-strategized terrorist cells in 3 countries. James's voice was quiet, imbued with a deep, unwavering respect. The intelligence officer whose operational plans are still taught as case studies. The same woman who seamlessly transformed into a corporate co-founder and then a grieving widow. Adaptable as always. Robert never forgot who you were beneath the persona you created for civilian life. Miranda moved to the window, the sprawling grounds of the estate she and Robert had built together stretching out under the persistent, gentle rain. The glass reflected her determined expression, a nascent steel hardening her eyes. Nathan believes I'm just a relic, she murmured, more to herself than to James, an old woman clinging to outdated notions, an obstacle to his vision. She turned back, a dangerous glint in her gaze. Victor sees me as an inconvenience to be managed. Neither understands what they're dealing with. What's our first move? James asked, his tone crisp, falling naturally into the role of trusted lieutenant. Miranda returned to the desk, spreading Robert's documents with a practiced hand. First, we verify everything. I need complete financial transparency, all of Nathan's hidden debts, every transaction Victor has influenced, every asset they've leveraged without proper authorization. I can access those records, James confirmed, already moving. My security clearances at Sinclair were never formally revoked after I retired. Second, we identify our allies within the company. There must be executives and board members who've noticed the irregularities but have been afraid to speak up. Margaret Chen in accounting has been quietly documenting discrepancies, James offered. And William Foster on the board has been asking pointed questions about recent acquisitions. Miranda nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Perfect starting points. Third, we need to understand exactly what Victor's endgame is. He's not dismantling the company. He wants to control it. But for what purpose? Based on his pattern at other companies, James explained, he positions himself to extract maximum value through a series of transactions that appear legitimate on the surface. By the time the manipulation becomes evident, he's moved on, leaving devastation in his wake. Miranda's expression hardened, the last vestiges of grief giving way to cold resolve. Not this time. Robert built Sinclair Motors with integrity at its foundation. I won't watch it become another corporate carcass picked clean by vultures. She gathered the documents carefully, securing them in a hidden safe built into the wall. Nathan abandoned me today, thinking he was teaching me humility. Instead, he's awakened something he doesn't understand. What do you need from me? James asked, his voice low and steady. Exactly what Robert asked of you. Be my eyes and ears, my right hand. Miranda's gaze was steady, the hurt and confusion of a mother replaced by calculated determination. Nathan sees me as weak. Victor sees me as irrelevant. Let them maintain those illusions while we prepare. As they left the study, Miranda paused at the door, her eyes lingering for a moment on Robert's empty chair. The space that had represented only loss for 3 long years now transformed into a source of renewed purpose. Robert knew this day might come, she said softly. He prepared for it, even from beyond the grave. He always said you were the strategist between you, James replied, a rare lightness in his tone. He just laid the groundwork. The campaign ahead is yours to lead. Miranda nodded once, decisively. Then let's begin. Outside, the storm was finally passing, the heavy sheets of rain giving way to scattered, glistening drops. Like the weather, Miranda's period of passive grief had come to an end. The clouds were breaking, and what emerged would be neither gentle nor forgiving. Dawn broke over the Sinclair estate, painting the manicured grounds in a soft, deceptive golden light that belied the storm of the previous day. Inside, in the sunroom, Miranda sat surrounded by a scatter of financial documents, a forgotten cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She had been at it since 5, meticulously piecing together the intricate puzzle Robert had begun before his death. "The pattern is worse than we thought," she announced to James as he entered carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee, his movements precise, almost military, despite the early hour. "Nathan has leveraged nearly 40% of his company's shares against personal loans." James placed a steaming cup beside her. "The lenders, some legitimate banks initially, but as his needs grew, he turned to less reputable sources." Miranda indicated several highlighted transactions. These 2 entities, Meridian Holdings and Phoenix Capital. They don't exist beyond shell corporations. Any idea who's really behind them? "Victor Reed, through various proxies," James confirmed, handing her a slim folder. "I spent the night tracing the ownership structures. He's created an elaborate web, but the connections are there if you know where to look." Miranda scanned the documents, her expression hardening, a flicker of outrage in her eyes. "So, Victor loaned my son money through these shells knowing Nathan couldn't repay, the collateral being his voting shares in Sinclair Motors." "Exactly. When Nathan inevitably defaults, control transfers to Victor without any visible takeover that might alert the board or regulators." James indicated a date on the calendar. "Based on the terms, the first major loan comes due next month. Nathan doesn't have the liquidity to cover it." Miranda leaned back, processing this information, the pieces clicking into a terrifying whole. "This explains Nathan's recent behavior, the desperation, the hostility toward any questioning of his decisions. He's trapped, and Victor has positioned himself as Nathan's only ally," James added, his voice grim, "isolating him from anyone who might offer genuine help, including you." "What about the company's finances? Nathan has CEO authority. Has he been siphoning corporate funds to cover his personal debts?" James's expression confirmed her fears before he spoke. "Not directly. That would be too obvious. But he's approved several questionable acquisitions and consulting contracts that funnel money to Victor's associates. On paper, they appear legitimate, but the services rendered are either grossly overpriced or entirely fictional." Miranda stood, moving to the large window overlooking the circular driveway, the very spot where Nathan had learned to ride his first bicycle, where he'd proudly displayed his first car, a vintage Mustang Robert had helped him restore. The memory of her beaming, oil-smeared 17-year-old son contrasted painfully with the man who had abandoned her on a rainy roadside. "He's still my son, James," she said quietly, her voice tinged with an ache even her renewed resolve couldn't silence. "Despite everything." "I know." James's tone held no judgment, only understanding. "Robert knew too. That's why his contingency plans were designed to protect both the company and Nathan himself from Victor and from his own worst impulses." Miranda turned back, resolution replacing sentiment, flickers of her past self igniting. "Then we proceed carefully. Victor is the primary target, but Nathan must face consequences if he's ever to rebuild what he's broken, both in the company and in our family." Her gaze found an organizational chart spread across the table. "What's our next step?" "We need allies within Sinclair Motors, people with access and loyalty. Margaret Chen in accounting. You mentioned she's noticed discrepancies." "Yes. She worked with Robert for 15 years. She's been documenting irregularities but feared raising concerns directly with Nathan. Contact her discreetly." Miranda smoothed the chart. "And William Foster on the board. He was Robert's friend before he was a business associate. Arrange a meeting somewhere Victor's network won't observe." James nodded, already planning his moves. "What about Nathan? He'll notice if you suddenly change your behavior toward him." "I'll maintain the persona he expects, the concerned but ultimately powerless mother." Miranda's smile held no warmth, a chilling edge in her voice. Let him believe yesterday's lesson achieved its purpose. The more comfortable Victor and Nathan feel, the more careless they'll become. By mid-morning, Miranda had established her command center in Robert's study, the quiet room now humming with a new, potent energy. The converted mausoleum hummed with a new kind of life. Secure comms blinked green, surveillance feeds painted a silent panorama of the estate, a digital shield around forgotten secrets. James, returning from his initial probes, brought a single devastating truth. Margaret will meet us tonight. She's bringing financial records, separate from the company's systems. He laid his phone on the desk. The message glowed, stark and urgent. Foster can't meet in person. Nathan and Victor's scrutiny is too heavy, but he sent this. Miranda's fingers trembled as she decrypted it. Board meeting moved up to Friday. Proposal to amend corporate bylaws on voting rights. Urgent intervention needed before then. Her voice was a low murmur, the words a physical blow. Friday. 3 days to prepare. What amendments? Dilution, James said, his face grim. Foster's intel points to stripping away Robert's protective provisions for family ownership. If it passes, Nathan can transfer controlling interest outside the family framework. No full board approval required. Miranda's eyes narrowed, a predator sensing its prey. Victor's endgame. Once those protections are gone, Nathan's defaulted loans automatically trigger a transfer of control to Victor's shell corporations. She pulled a heavy binder from the hidden safe, Robert's original corporate blueprints. We activate the contingency. Robert established a separate class of shares, held in trust, controlled by me as his widow. They supersede all others in matters of company control. Nathan doesn't know these exist. No, James confirmed. On paper, he believes he inherited Robert's entire stake. These shadow shares only awaken under specific circumstances, like the ones we're facing now. She traced the complex legal language with a manicured nail. We need a securities attorney who can deploy this without tipping our hand. Robert had one. Elizabeth Winters. She structured these provisions, retired but still consults. She looked up, her gaze pinning James. Contact her. Immediately. We need her expertise before Friday. As James made the call, Miranda's fingers flew across a discreet keyboard, accessing Nathan's executive calendar. The administrator privileges Robert had set up years ago still opened every door. What she found tightened the noose of their timeline even further. Nathan has a meeting with Victor and unknown parties tonight at the Cardinal Club, she reported, naming the exclusive haunt where the city's power brokers cut their darkest deals. The timing suggests they're finalizing details before Friday's board presentation. James clicked his phone shut. Elizabeth will see us at 2 p.m. today. She remembers Robert's arrangements clearly. Good. Miranda rose, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in her eyes. Before then, I make an appearance at Sinclair headquarters. Nathan will expect confrontation or submission. I'll give him the latter. Let him believe his lesson worked. Is that wise? James's brow furrowed. Going into their territory? Miranda's expression hardened, a look James hadn't seen since their military days, the cool calculation of a strategist accepting inevitable risk. Sometimes the best reconnaissance happens in plain sight. Nathan will be so pleased with my submission that he won't notice what I'm truly observing. She moved with practiced efficiency. While I'm there, access Nathan's home office, his personal laptop. It should hold communications with Victor that aren't on company servers. Consider it done. James's own face tightened into a mask of operational focus. Security systems? A hint of sadness colored Miranda's voice. Nathan never changed the override codes Robert and I established. Another example of his carelessness. The primary code is still his childhood birthday. Before she left, Miranda paused at Robert's desk, her hand resting briefly on the polished wood. Robert saw this coming. He tried to protect Nathan from himself. And now that task falls to you, James observed quietly. Yes. Her moment of reflection passed, replaced by resolute determination. Nathan abandoned me on that road, thinking he was demonstrating his power. Instead, he showed me exactly how far he's fallen and how necessary it is to stop both him and Victor before they destroy everything Robert built. She straightened, every inch the general planning her campaign. By Friday, they'll understand what a terrible mistake they've made, not just in their scheme against Sinclair Motors, but in underestimating exactly who they're facing. James nodded, a grim smile touching his weathered face. They have no idea. Sinclair Motors headquarters, a 22-story monument of glass and steel, gleamed under the midday sun in the city's financial district. Miranda entered through the executive entrance, acknowledging the security personnel who greeted her with the deference always shown to the founder's widow, despite her now diminished role under Nathan's leadership. "Mrs. Sinclair," the receptionist on the executive floor gasped, genuine surprise in her voice. "We weren't expecting you today." "I thought I'd check in with my son," Miranda replied, her voice deliberately softer, her posture slightly stooped, the physical manifestation of the submission Nathan expected after yesterday's lesson. "Mr. Sinclair is in a budget meeting, but I'll let him know you're here." "No need to interrupt him," Miranda demurred, her smile barely touching her eyes. "I'll wait in my old office if it's still available," the receptionist hesitated. "Your former office has been reassigned, but you're welcome to use the visitor's lounge." "Of course." Miranda's smile held firm, masking the confirmation of yet another calculated slight. Her office, maintained for years out of respect for her founder status, had been repurposed. Another move to erase her presence. Yet, the visitor's lounge offered a strategic advantage, overlooking the main executive corridor. She settled into a plush chair, positioning herself with a clear view of Nathan's door and the conference rooms beyond, a patient spider in the center of a web. Within 20 minutes, her patience was rewarded. Nathan emerged from the main boardroom, flanked by financial executives, Victor a silent shadow at his right hand. Nathan looked tired, the stress etched around his eyes, his confident stance a practiced facade. For a fleeting second, Miranda saw past the arrogant CEO to the pressured man drowning in the consequences of his own making. She waited until his gaze snagged on her, carefully arranging her features into an expression of cautious reconciliation. Nathan faltered, surprise, then calculated satisfaction, crossing his face. He excused himself from his group, approaching her with a loud theatrical greeting. "Mother, I'm surprised to see you here." "I thought we should talk," Miranda said, her voice appropriately subdued. "Yesterday was difficult for both of us." Nathan's posture relaxed, her tone registering as capitulation. "Let's use my office." Victor materialized at Nathan's elbow, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Mrs. Sinclair, what an unexpected pleasure." He turned to Nathan. "Shall I reschedule your call with the Frankfurt investors?" "No need," Nathan replied, dismissive confidence in his voice. "This won't take long." His certainty that his mother posed no threat worthy of disrupting his schedule was exactly what Miranda had anticipated. She followed them into the sprawling corner office that had once been Robert's domain, now stripped down with modern minimalist decor, erasing all trace of the company's founder. "I'll give you privacy," Victor offered smoothly, but Miranda noted he left the connecting door to his adjacent office conspicuously ajar. Nathan settled behind the imposing desk, the clear position of power. "You've had time to reconsider your approach to company matters." Miranda clasped her hands in her lap, the picture of a chastened mother. "I realize I've been resistant to changes that perhaps are necessary in today's market. My concerns truly come from caring about Robert's legacy, but I understand the company must evolve." The tension in Nathan's shoulders visibly eased. She was playing directly into his expectations. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. Your interference in board matters has been counterproductive." "I only want what's best for Sinclair Motors," Miranda said, allowing a calculated tremble in her voice. "And for you, Nathan. You're still my son." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, Perhaps a momentary recognition of the cruelty of his recent actions, or simply satisfaction at her apparent surrender. The board meeting on Friday will implement important structural changes. I expect your support, not your questioning. Of course, she nodded. Though I'd appreciate understanding the changes before the meeting, so I'm properly prepared. Nathan hesitated, then reached for a folder on his desk. We're streamlining the ownership structure to facilitate faster decision-making and strategic partnerships. These amendments remove outdated restrictions that limit our growth potential. Miranda accepted the folder, scanning the documents, maintaining her facade of mild confusion. The amendments were precisely as James had reported, designed to strip away the family ownership requirements, clearing the path for Nathan to transfer controlling interest to outside entities. This seems very technical, she said, playing her role. I trust you've had proper legal review. The best, Nathan replied dismissively. Victor has assembled a top-tier legal team to ensure everything is properly structured. Miranda noted the phrasing. Victor's team, not Sinclair's long-standing corporate counsel. Another red flag. I see, she said, returning the folder. Well, I won't take more of your time. I know how busy you are leading the company. Nathan studied her, satisfaction evident in his expression. The understanding reached with her mother yesterday felt less like peace and more like a clarified battle line. Yes, Miranda agreed softly, a thread of ice in her voice. It clarified many things for me. As she rose from the polished mahogany, she made sure to leave her cashmere scarf draped casually over the back of the chair, a soft, innocuous hook to ensure her return. Will you be home for dinner tonight? Her question was a delicate probe. Perhaps we could continue rebuilding our relationship. Nathan didn't meet her eyes. I have a business dinner at the Cardinal Club. Tomorrow, perhaps. The Cardinal Club. She kept her tone conversational, a velvet glove disguising a steel trap. That's quite exclusive. Important clients? Strategic partners? He replied vaguely, already dismissing her. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. Miranda nodded, the acceptance a carefully constructed facade. Of course, another time. But as she moved through the executive corridor, her gaze sharpened. She noted the offices where lights still burned, the hushed whispers that ceased abruptly as she passed, the subtle tension in hunched shoulders, the quick, sympathetic glances from employees who remembered Robert Sinclair. The air itself felt thick with Nathan's new regime. In the cool solitude of her car, Miranda pulled out her burner phone. James, it's confirmed, Cardinal Club tonight. They're finalizing the legal strategy for Friday's board meeting. Understood. James's voice was calm, efficient. I've completed my search of Nathan's home office. You were right. His personal laptop contained extensive communications with Victor Reed, stretching back 18 months. I've copied everything to secure storage. What about the external partnerships? Miranda pressed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Any indication of who's behind the shell companies? Still tracing that, James admitted. But I found something else concerning. References to finalizing arrangements with overseas investors after Friday's amendments pass. The communication suggests these investors require anonymity and are willing to pay substantially above market value for their position. Miranda's mind raced. Money laundering? Or something else entirely? Unknown. But Nathan appears desperate to complete the deal. His personal accounts show he's nearly insolvent despite his CEO's salary. The gambling debts are even worse than we initially thought. And Victor stands to receive a substantial finder's fee when the deal closes. I imagine, Miranda murmured, a cold smile touching her lips. What about our meeting with Elizabeth Winters? Scheduled for 2 p.m. as planned. I've briefed her on the situation. Good. And Margaret Chen? Meeting us at Elizabeth's office. She's bringing financial records that should confirm the pattern of suspicious transactions. Miranda checked her watch. I'll meet you at Elizabeth's. In the meantime, see what you can find about tonight's meeting at the Cardinal Club. Who's attending? What room have they booked? Already on it, James confirmed. One more thing. I've activated surveillance on Victor's known residences and movements. He made an interesting call immediately after you left Nathan's office. To whom? Unknown number, but he reported that you appeared subdued and no longer a concern. He specifically said, "She's broken, proceed as planned." A genuine, chilling smile played on Miranda's lips this time. Perfect. Let them believe I'm neutralized. It's exactly the cover we need for what comes next. As she drove toward Elizabeth Winter's office, she reflected on the insidious rot within Sinclair Motors. Nathan, a puppet dancing on the edge of insolvency. Victor pulling the strings, a spider in a meticulously crafted web. The company Robert had built with such integrity, a bedrock of their family, was being systematically prepared for exploitation. "You were right to be concerned, Robert," she whispered to the empty passenger seat. "But you were also right to prepare. They've made their moves. Now, I'll make mine." Elizabeth Winter's office occupied the top floor of a discreet, pre-war building in the old financial district, a sanctuary far removed from the cold, cutting-edge glass towers that now dominated the city skyline. At 72, Elizabeth had officially retired from her formidable career as one of the country's preeminent corporate attorneys. Yet, she maintained a small, exclusive practice for long-standing clients whose complex situations demanded absolute discretion. "Miranda," Elizabeth greeted with genuine warmth, embracing her fiercely. "It's been too long. I've missed our conversations." "Elizabeth, thank you for seeing us on such short notice." The attorney gestured them into her private conference room where Margaret Chen already waited, a stack of files organized meticulously on the table. The usually composed accountant rose nervously as they entered, her demeanor betraying a tremor of anxiety. "Mrs. Sinclair," Margaret began, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been documenting financial irregularities for months, but I didn't know who to trust. When Mr. Reeves contacted me—" "You did exactly right," Miranda reassured her, taking a seat at the table. "Robert always said you were the most meticulous accountant he'd ever worked with. That's why he positioned you where you could monitor the company's financial health." Margaret's expression softened, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "He did that intentionally?" "Robert saw further ahead than most people realized," James explained, closing the door and engaging the privacy lock. "He placed trusted individuals throughout the company structure as a safeguard." Elizabeth cleared her throat, her gaze sharp, cutting through the emotional undercurrent. "Let's address the immediate situation. James has briefed me on the proposed bylaw amendments and Friday's board meeting. Based on what I've reviewed, Victor Reed has orchestrated a sophisticated, hostile takeover, using Nathan as his unwitting facilitator." "Not entirely unwitting," Miranda corrected gently, the lines of concern etched around her eyes. "Nathan's poor choices created his vulnerability, but he's actively participating in dismantling the protections Robert established." "Indeed," Elizabeth agreed, reaching for a leather portfolio embossed with the Winters and Associates logo. "Fortunately, Robert anticipated this very possibility. The contingency provisions we created together are still legally binding and take precedence over any amendments Nathan might push through." She spread several documents across the table, her finger tracing key sections. Robert established a dual-class share structure when he reorganized the company after his diagnosis. The public-facing shares, the ones Nathan believes constitute controlling interest, are actually subordinate to these Class B shares held in trust. Margaret leaned forward, her professional curiosity superseding her nerves. "These shares don't appear on any financial statements I've seen." "They wouldn't," Elizabeth confirmed. "They exist in a separate legal structure, triggered only under specific conditions like the ones we're facing now. Miranda, as trustee, can activate these shares when necessary to protect the company from exactly this type of situation." Miranda studied the intricate legal framework Robert had so cunningly woven. "And this activation, how do we implement it?" "I've prepared the necessary filings," Elizabeth replied, producing another folder. "Once executed, these documents establish your controlling interest, effective immediately. However, strategic timing is crucial. If Nathan becomes aware of these shares before the board meeting, he might attempt legal maneuvers to challenge their validity. "We need the element of surprise," James observed, his gaze moving between Miranda and Elizabeth. "Precisely." Elizabeth turned to Margaret. "That's where your financial documentation becomes vital. By presenting evidence of fiduciary malfeasance alongside Miranda's assertion of controlling interest, we create an airtight case for her intervention." Margaret nodded, opening her files. "I've tracked 3 distinct patterns of financial irregularity. First, a series of acquisitions of underperforming dealerships at inflated prices, all owned by shell companies that trace back to Victor Reed's associates. Second, consulting contracts for services never actually rendered. Third, the systematic overvaluation of certain inventory categories to artificially inflate quarterly results." She pushed forward a USB drive. "Everything is documented here. Transaction records, market comparisons proving the inflated valuations, and evidence that Nathan personally approved each irregularity, despite warnings from the finance department." Miranda accepted the drive, her expression grave. "This goes beyond poor management. This is potential securities fraud." "Yes," Margaret confirmed quietly, "which is why I've been so concerned. These actions put the entire company at risk, not just financially, but legally." Elizabeth interlaced her fingers, her experienced gaze assessing the strategic landscape. "Based on this evidence, we have multiple options. The most direct approach would be for Miranda to activate her controlling shares immediately and remove Nathan as CEO before Friday's meeting." "No," Miranda said firmly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "That approach addresses the symptom, not the disease. Victor would simply retreat and find another vulnerable company to target, and Nathan would never understand the full consequences of his actions." "What do you propose instead?" Elizabeth asked, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "A more comprehensive strategy." Miranda rose, moving to the window overlooking the vast city where Sinclair Motors had grown from a single dealership to a sprawling automotive empire. "We allow Friday's meeting to proceed as planned, with certain modifications." James recognized the tactical brilliance forming. "You want to let them reveal their full plan before countering." "Exactly." Miranda turned back to the group, her natural authority now fully ignited, a quiet force commanding the room. "Victor believes I'm neutralized, a broken old woman no longer capable of challenging their scheme. That perception is our greatest advantage." She returned to the table, her gaze sweeping over each face. "Elizabeth, prepare the share activation documents, but we'll hold them in reserve. Margaret, continue gathering evidence, particularly regarding these overseas investors James discovered. We need to identify exactly who Victor is planning to sell controlling interests to." "And the board meeting?" Elizabeth prompted. "I'll attend as expected," Miranda said, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. The subdued, compliant mother supporting her son's vision. Miranda's smile was a sliver of ice. "But you, Elizabeth, will attend as my personal counsel." The words hung in the air, a silken cord already tightening. James leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "Your presence alone will signal to the more experienced board members that something significant is occurring. Foster will support you." He paused, eyes glinting. "And I've identified 2 other board members who have expressed private concerns about Nathan's leadership. Good. We'll need their votes when the moment comes." Miranda turned to Margaret, her gaze unwavering. "Can you prepare a comprehensive financial presentation, revealing the full extent of the irregularities? Something clear enough that even non-financial board members will understand the implications?" "Absolutely," Margaret confirmed, a professional confidence replacing the earlier tremor in her hands. "I can have it ready by tomorrow." "Perfect," Miranda addressed the group, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tonight, James and I will conduct surveillance at the Cardinal Club. We need to identify Victor's external partners before Friday. Once we have that piece, our strategy will be complete. Elizabeth studied Miranda with a newfound appreciation. Robert always said you were the strategist between you. Now I understand what he meant. Miranda's eyes softened, a fleeting shadow of a memory. Robert built Sinclair Motors on principles of integrity and quality. I won't allow Victor's greed or Nathan's weakness to destroy that legacy. As the meeting concluded, each participant departed separately, fading into the evening's anonymity. Miranda was the last to leave, pausing as Elizabeth walked her to the elevator. "There's something else," the attorney said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Something Robert asked me to tell you if this day ever came." Miranda waited, a familiar tightness forming in her chest at the mention of her late husband. "He said to remind you of Sarah Yeo, 1982. Elizabeth watched comprehension dawn in Miranda's eyes. "He said you'd understand what it meant." Miranda nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Memories surfaced of a mission long ago, one where she'd faced a similar betrayal and responded with a calculated precision that had become legendary within their unit. "Thank you, Elizabeth," she said softly. "Robert always did know exactly what I needed to hear, even from beyond the grave." As the elevator descended, Miranda's reflection in the polished doors showed a woman transformed, no longer the grieving widow or concerned mother, but a strategist fully in her element, preparing for the decisive engagement in a campaign too long delayed. Nathan had abandoned her in the boardroom, believing he was delivering a lesson in power. By Friday, he would receive an education of his own, one far more consequential than he could possibly imagine. The Cardinal Club occupied the entirety of a restored Victorian mansion on the city's west side, its membership limited to the upper echelon of business leaders and old money families. Miranda hadn't visited since Robert's memorial service, but the doorman, Edward, recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Sinclair, what an unexpected pleasure," he greeted with genuine warmth. "We've missed seeing you here." "Thank you, Edward. It's been too long." She offered a conspirator's smile. "I'm actually hoping to surprise my son. I believe he's in a meeting here tonight." Edward consulted his reservation system. "Yes, Mr. Sinclair has the Wellington room reserved from 7 Sons. Would you like me to announce you?" "No, thank you. I'd rather surprise him." Miranda glanced at her watch. 6:30 p.m. "Perhaps I'll wait in the library until his group arrives." "Of course, Mrs. Sinclair." The club's mahogany-panelled library provided an excellent vantage point overlooking the main entrance. Miranda selected a high-backed chair, partially concealed by a decorative screen, positioning herself to observe arrivals without being immediately visible. Her phone vibrated with a text from James. "In position at service entrance. Security cameras on loop for East Corridor access to Wellington Room." Miranda smiled slightly, a silent acknowledgement of James' technical skills capabilities that had served them well in their former careers and now provided crucial advantages in this very different kind of operation. At precisely 6:45, Victor Reed arrived, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that screamed, "New money," attempting to appear established. He checked his watch impatiently, scanning the lobby with the calculating gaze of someone perpetually assessing angles and advantages. Nathan arrived 5 minutes later, his confident stride betrayed by the nervous adjustment of his tie as he approached Victor. Miranda observed their interaction with practiced detachment, the subtle power dynamic evident in how Victor directed Nathan with light touches to his elbow, the younger man's unconscious deference to his supposed advisor. But it was the third arrival that caught Miranda's full attention. Anton Knov, a Russian businessman with reputed connections to organized crime and money laundering operations, entered the club accompanied by 2 associates. Miranda had never met him personally, but she recognized him immediately from intelligence briefings during her former career. His presence clarified the nature of the overseas investors referenced in Nathan's communications. She sent a quick text to James. "Knov present. Need audio in Wellington Room ASAP. The response came seconds later. Already done. Access on secure channel 3. Miranda inserted a discreet earpiece, activating the connection to the surveillance James had established. As the group moved toward the private dining room, she slipped out of the library and made her way to the adjacent sitting room, close enough to maintain audio clarity while remaining undetected. Final terms are agreeable, Knov was saying, his accent less pronounced than she expected. Once the amendments pass on Friday, we transfer the first payment of 50 million. The remainder follows when control officially changes hands. And the, origin of these funds? Nathan's voice held barely concealed anxiety. Knov's laugh was cold. Is not your concern, Mr. Sinclair. Your company's established import-export infrastructure is what interests us. The funds are clean by the time they reach you. Mr. Sinclair is simply ensuring all regulatory requirements are satisfied, Victor interjected smoothly, laying a hand on Nathan's arm. The structure we've created provides complete insulation for all parties. Of course, Knov agreed. Now, shall we discuss the operational transition? Once we assume controlling interest, certain aspects of your business will require modification. Miranda listened intently as Knov outlined plans to use Sinclair Motors' legitimate international shipping channels and financial networks for what was clearly a sophisticated money laundering operation. Nathan's periodic attempts to assert conditions were gently but firmly redirected by Victor, who had clearly orchestrated every aspect of the arrangement. And my position going forward? Nathan finally asked the question Miranda had been waiting for. You remain as CEO for appearances, Knov replied casually. A figurehead with appropriate compensation. Day-to-day operations will be managed by our team, with Mr. Reed serving as our liaison. The disappointment in Nathan's voice was palpable, even through the surveillance audio. That wasn't my understanding. I was told I'd maintain operational control. Plans evolve, Victor said smoothly. This arrangement offers you financial security without the burdens of actual management. Given your recent difficulties with decision-making, isn't that preferable? The implied threat beneath Victor's words was clear. Nathan's gambling debts and financial mismanagement had left him with no negotiating leverage. He was being sidelined in his own company, and there was nothing he could do about it. Your debts will be forgiven, Knov added, as if offering a generous concession. Consider it a retirement package. Miranda had heard enough. She slipped out of the sitting room and texted James. Continue surveillance. Meeting Elizabeth at office to finalize strategy. On her drive to Elizabeth's office, Miranda processed what she'd learned. The situation was worse than they'd anticipated. Not just financial fraud and corporate malfeasance, but potential involvement in international money laundering. Nathan hadn't just compromised his inheritance, he'd entangled Sinclair Motors in a criminal enterprise. Elizabeth was waiting when Miranda arrived, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. It's Knov, Miranda announced without preamble. Anton Knov and his organization are the overseas investors. Elizabeth removed her glasses, her expression grave. The same Knov linked to money laundering operations across Eastern Europe. The very same. They're planning to use Sinclair's international infrastructure to clean money. Nathan is being reduced to a figurehead, though I don't think he fully comprehends that yet. This changes our approach considerably, Elizabeth observed, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. We're no longer simply dealing with corporate governance issues, but potential criminal activity. Miranda paced the office, her mind already racing, piecing together the revised strategy. We need to add another layer to our plan. Beyond protecting the company and removing Victor's influence, we need to ensure Nathan understands the full consequences of his actions. You still want to save him? Elizabeth noted, not as a question, but as recognition of Miranda's underlying motivation. Save him from Knov. Yes, save him from criminal prosecution if possible. Miranda's expression hardened, but not from resentment. Nathan needs to face the consequences of his choices, controlled consequences that don't destroy his future entirely. What do you propose? We proceed with the original plan for Friday's board meeting, but with a critical addition. Miranda outlined her revised strategy, Elizabeth nodding with increasing approval as the plan took shape. It's risky, the attorney noted when Miranda finished. The timing will need to be perfect. It will be. Miranda's confidence was absolute, a steel core forged in decades of calculated risk. James is continuing surveillance tonight. By morning, everything will be in place. Miranda Sinclair's voice was a low current, cold and precise. Elizabeth Thorne, her longtime attorney, gathered the sheaf of legal documents they had fastidiously prepared. I'll integrate the night's connection into the amended filings, Miranda continued, her gaze unwavering. The share activation papers are on standby for your signature, Elizabeth. Hold them until Friday morning, Miranda instructed, a sliver of ice in her tone. No premature discovery, not a whisper. As Elizabeth moved towards the door, Miranda's voice stopped her. Elizabeth, she said, the single word a fragile thread in the air. One more thing. If this goes badly, if our strategy falters for any reason, I need to know Nathan won't face the absolute worst consequences. Elizabeth studied her old friend, compassion softening her features. You're still protecting him, even now, after everything he's done. He's made terrible choices, Miranda acknowledged, her jaw tight. But he's still Robert's son, still my son. I understand, Elizabeth nodded, a silent vow passing between them. Contingency measures are in place. We can demonstrate Nathan was manipulated by Victor, unaware of the full criminal implications of Knitov's involvement. Miranda's shoulders straightened, the fragile moment of maternal fear hardening into resolve. Thank you. Now we prepare for Friday. Nathan abandoned me, expecting submission. He will find his last mistake was forgetting exactly who his mother is. Driving home through the hushed, winding streets, Miranda felt the strange, bitter irony of it all. For years she had meticulously buried her past, camouflaged as the dutiful corporate wife, then the grieving widow. Nathan had never glimpsed the sharp edges of his parents' former lives, the skills forged long before his birth. Friday would not merely decide Sinclair Motors' fate, it would unearth the true foundations of the family built upon it. Thursday dawned with a stark, almost blinding clarity, a perfect mirror to Miranda's own mind. The haze of hurt, the dull ache of betrayal that had clouded her since Nathan's perfidy, had burned away, leaving a crystalline focus, a methodical, chilling purpose. Just as the first light touched the manor, James, her security chief, arrived. He carried a silver tray with a silent breakfast and a flash drive containing the recordings from the remainder of the previous night's clandestine meeting at the Cardinal Club. They continued for another 2 hours after you left, James reported, plugging the device into Robert's old laptop. The screen flickered to life. The conversation grew more technical. Specific plans to use Sinclair's import-export channels to funnel money through various jurisdictions. Miranda listened, her eyes fixed on the blank screen, the voices from the recording filling the quiet room. Victor's booming certainty dominated, punctuated by Nathan's hesitant questions, each one a stark revelation of his naive complicity. He's completely out of his depth, she observed, her voice barely a whisper. Listen to the glances exchanged between Knitov and Victor when Nathan speaks. They barely conceal their contempt. Nathan seems primarily concerned with securing his lifestyle, James noted grimly, less about the company's future or the legality of their proposals. The recording played on, unspooling Nathan's increasingly frantic attempts to extract guarantees regarding his financial compensation and position, met only by Victor and Knitov's vague, increasingly hollow reassurances. They'll discard him the moment the transfer is complete, Miranda declared, silencing the playback. He's signing away his birthright for empty promises and temporary reprieve. James nodded. They discussed the board meeting at length. Victor has arranged for 2 members to be absent conveniently, the ones most likely to question the amendments. They believe they have the votes. Which board members are being sidelined? There was a dangerous calm in Miranda's question. Jenkins and Watkins. Both received urgent calls regarding family emergencies. A thin smile touched Miranda's lips, a razor's edge. Contact them directly. Explain the actual situation. Arrange secure transportation. We need every ally present. While James made the calls, Miranda delved into the financial evidence Margaret, her forensic accountant, had compiled overnight. It was a devastating dossier: systematic mismanagement, deliberate fraud, meticulously organized into a presentation even a non-financial board member could grasp. By mid-morning, Elizabeth returned, the final legal documents clutched in her briefcase, including the share activation papers that would confirm Miranda's controlling interest. Everything is in order, the attorney confirmed. I've also prepared documentation for the regulatory authorities concerning Knitov's involvement. Once activated, we can move immediately to protect the company from criminal exposure. Miranda signed the share activation documents, dating them for Friday morning. These remain with you, Elizabeth, until 1 hour before the meeting. Still no possibility of premature discovery. Understood. Elizabeth secured the papers. What about Nathan? How do you want to handle his criminal involvement? It was the question that had gnawed at Miranda through a sleepless night. As a mother, she yearned to shield him. As the guardian of Robert's legacy, she could not ignore his willing participation in a scheme designed to dismantle everything they had built. We present the evidence of his mismanagement and the fraudulent transactions, she decided, the words etched from steel. But we frame his involvement with Knitov as manipulation by Victor, Nathan as an unwitting participant, not an active conspirator. That may be difficult to maintain given the recordings, James observed, his tone carefully neutral. The recordings demonstrate his financial desperation and poor judgment, yes, but also his limited understanding of what he was facilitating, Miranda countered. We use them to remove him from power, not to send him to prison. Elizabeth nodded. A balanced approach. Consequences without destruction. The rest of the day unfolded with the cold precision of a military operation. Margaret delivered the final financial presentation, a weapon honed to perfection. Jenkins and Watkins were secretly briefed, their unexpected appearance arranged. Surveillance continued on Victor's movements, capturing his final triumphant preparations. Late afternoon brought a call from Nathan, the first direct contact since he'd abandoned her on the roadside. Mother. His voice held an almost theatrical casualness. I wanted to confirm you'll be attending that board meeting tomorrow. Of course, Nathan, she replied, her own tone a perfect mimicry, signaling James to record the call. As we discussed, I want to support the company's new direction. Good. His relief was palpable, even across the phone lines. The amendments we're proposing are somewhat technical, but essential for our growth strategy. I'm sure you know what's best for the company, Miranda said, the subtle irony in her words entirely lost on him. Will your friend Victor be presenting them? He'll be there as CFO, but this is my initiative, Nathan insisted, a desperate defensiveness in his voice, betraying his need to believe he still held the reins. The partnerships these changes will facilitate represent the future of Sinclair Motors. I look forward to learning more tomorrow, Miranda purred. Perhaps dinner afterwards? To celebrate this new chapter? The question clearly caught Nathan off guard. Yes, that would be nice, assuming the vote goes as expected. I'm sure everything will proceed exactly as it should, Miranda replied, allowing a hint of her true meaning to colour the words. I'll see you tomorrow, son. After ending the call, she turned to James. He's nervous. He wants to believe this is still his plan, his company, but doubt is creeping in. Will that make him more dangerous tomorrow? Potentially, Miranda acknowledged, her eyes distant. but also more vulnerable to recognizing the truth when it's presented. Deep down, Nathan knows he's lost control. Part of him may even be relieved when it ends. As evening fell, Miranda sought solace at Robert's grave, a private moment before the coming storm. The granite headstone stood solid, dignified, much like the man it commemorated. "Tomorrow I'll protect what we built," she whispered to the setting sun. "I'll also try to save our son from himself, though I don't know if that's still possible." The cemetery offered no answers, yet a quiet peace settled over her. Robert had prepared for this, trusting her to execute the necessary response. Tomorrow would reveal if that trust had been well placed. Returning home, she found James completing the final security sweep. "Everything is in place," he reported. "Elizabeth confirmed the share activation will be filed first thing. Margaret is ready to present the financials. Jenkins and Watkins will arrive unannounced. And the authorities regarding Knitov are on standby. Once we have board authorization, they can move immediately to freeze pending transactions and investigate the money laundering." Miranda nodded, a silent approval. "Then we are as prepared as we can be. The rest depends on execution." James studied her with the quiet insight forged over decades of shared purpose. "You're concerned about Nathan's reaction?" "Yes," she admitted, her gaze drifting to the window, to the encroaching darkness. "Tomorrow destroys the fiction he's been living in, not just about the company, but about who I am, who his father and I always were." "He may never fully understand," James observed gently. "Some people aren't equipped to reconcile contradictory truths about their parents." "Perhaps not," Miranda agreed, watching the estate grounds, once filled with Nathan's childish laughter, disappear into shadow. "But he needs to face reality, whatever he ultimately makes of it. The time for protective fictions has passed." Tomorrow, a reckoning years in the making, would crash down on Sinclair Motors, threatening not just the company's future, but the very last threads of the family that built it. "Crisis," she murmured, gazing at the city lights through her penthouse window. "Always reveals character. Robert always said that." A shadow passed over her face. "Tomorrow we learn what Nathan is truly made of, and if there's anything left worth saving." A shroud of unseasonable fog greeted Friday morning, painting the skyscrapers in hues of grey that mirrored the day's grim gravity. Miranda, with the precision of a seasoned combatant, chose a navy suit, a professional commanding silhouette Robert had always admired, a silent declaration of authority. James's voice, calm and steady from the driver's seat, cut through the quiet hum of the luxury sedan. "Elizabeth called. The share activation documents have been filed and confirmed. You officially hold the controlling interest." Miranda gave a crisp nod, her gaze fixed on the notes in her hand. "Our board allies?" Jenkins arrived at his hotel last night. Watkins is en route from the airport, due to enter separately, 15 minutes before the meeting. James paused. "Victor and Nathan?" "Already at headquarters. Since 7. Securing last-minute votes, presumably." Miranda watched the fog swallow the passing buildings. "After today," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "nothing will be the same for any of us, especially Nathan." James risked a glance. "Are you having second thoughts?" Her reply was immediate, firm. "No. But I take no pleasure in this. Nathan created this situation, but knowing that doesn't make it any easier." "Robert would be proud," James said softly, "of your balance of justice and mercy." 40 minutes before the appointed time, they arrived. Miranda bypassed the executive entrance, choosing the main lobby. It was a deliberate choice, a silent parade past the employees who had known her since the company's founding. Their respectful greetings, the warmth in the eyes of long-serving staff, a powerful reminder of the legacy she fought to protect. Elizabeth Winters, sharp as ever, waited in their designated staging room, accompanied by Margaret Chen, whose nervous energy manifested in the incessant reordering of her presentation slides. Everything is prepared, Elizabeth confirmed, her tone crisp. The share certificates are registered. Once the meeting begins, the new ownership structure will be officially entered into the record. Miranda turned to Margaret. And the evidence? The accountant gestured to her meticulously arranged presentation. All documented. Financial trails, fraudulent transactions, unauthorized transfers, everything to demonstrate the systematic mismanagement and deception. Miranda's gaze was unyielding. Present the facts clearly, without emotion. The evidence speaks for itself. 5 minutes before the meeting, confirmation arrived. Jenkins and Watkins were in position. The element of surprise remained intact. "It's time," James said, checking his watch. "The others are assembling." Miranda paused, drawing on decades of navigating high-stakes rooms. Then, with a measured, purposeful stride, she led her small team toward the boardroom. The silence that fell as she entered was precisely what she had anticipated. Nathan, mid-sentence at the head of the table, faltered. Victor, a silent shadow behind his right shoulder, stiffened. Board members looked up, a mix of surprise and relief on their faces as Miranda, flanked by the formidable Elizabeth Winters, took a seat. Not at her usual place near the end, but halfway down the table, a subtle, irrefutable shift in the room's dynamic. "Mother," Nathan recovered quickly, his tone a carefully woven tapestry of welcome and caution. "And Ms. Winters. I wasn't aware you'd be bringing counsel today." Miranda's smile was pleasant, almost serene. Given the significance of today's proposed amendments, it seemed prudent. Victor's eyes, almost imperceptibly, narrowed. "Mrs. Sinclair, outside counsel is permitted, of course, but these amendments have been thoroughly reviewed by our legal team." "I'm sure," Miranda replied, her voice soft. "Nevertheless, I prefer independent evaluation of such significant changes." Nathan glanced at his watch. "We should begin. We have several absent members today, but we have quorum." At that moment, the boardroom door opened. Jenkins and Watkins, in quick succession, entered, their unexpected appearance a visible jolt to Nathan and Victor. "Apologies for the confusion regarding our attendance," Jenkins announced smoothly, taking his seat. "Fortunately, the emergencies we were notified about proved to be misunderstandings." The emphasis on emergencies sent a ripple of tension through the room. Victor's composure fractured. He leaned in, whispering urgently to Nathan, whose face hardened. "Now that we're all present," Nathan began, a forced confidence in his voice. "Let's proceed with the agenda. The primary item today is the proposed amendments to our corporate structure, which will enable strategic partnerships essential for our continued growth." "Before we address the amendments," Miranda interjected, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command, "there's a matter of corporate governance that must be entered into the record." Nathan frowned. "Any other business should be addressed after the primary agenda items." "This directly impacts those items," Elizabeth stated, opening her briefcase and removing official documents. "As of 8:15 this morning, the ownership structure of Sinclair Motors has been updated to reflect the activation of previously dormant Class B shares held in trust since Mr. Robert Sinclair's reorganization of the company 3 years ago." She slid copies across the table. "These shares, now activated by Mrs. Sinclair as trustee, constitute controlling interest in the company and supersede all other share classes in matters of corporate governance." A confused murmur erupted as board members snatched up the documents. Victor snatched a copy, his face darkening as he scanned the legal language. "This is preposterous," he snapped, all pretense of professional courtesy vanishing. "These supposed shares were never disclosed in any company filings. They were properly registered with the appropriate regulatory authorities," Elizabeth countered smoothly. "Their dormant status exempted them from disclosure until activation. I should know. I drafted the documents myself at Robert Sinclair's request." Nathan stared at Miranda, betrayal and confusion warring in his eyes. You've been planning this, a secret takeover of my company." Not a takeover, Nathan, Miranda corrected gently. A safeguard. One your father put in place to protect Sinclair Motors from exactly the situation we now face. She nodded to Margaret, who connected her laptop. Before we discuss the proposed amendments, the board should be aware of certain financial irregularities that have occurred under current management. The next 30 minutes unfolded with devastating precision. Margaret methodically presented a damning compilation. Evidence of mismanagement, unauthorized transfers, fraudulent valuations, suspicious acquisitions, all documented, irrefutable. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern, then outright alarm, as the pattern of deception became unmistakable. Miranda watched Nathan. His initial defiance crumbled into grim recognition. Victor's controlled facade cracked, barely concealing panic. When Margaret finished, Miranda addressed the stunned silence. There is more you need to know. The amendments proposed today aren't simply about strategic partnerships. They're designed to facilitate the transfer of controlling interest in Sinclair Motors to Anton Kunitsov and his organization, entities with documented connections to international money laundering operations. She nodded to James, who activated audio recordings from the Cardinal Club meeting. Nathan's voice filled the boardroom, followed by Victor's, then Kunitsov's. The damning conversation left no room for denial. As the recording ended, Nathan slumped in his chair, the full consequences of his actions finally registering. Victor, however, was already calculating escape routes, his eyes darting to the exits as he edged away from the table. "Security is waiting outside, Mr. Petrov," James stated calmly, blocking the main door, along with representatives from the Financial Crimes Division. Miranda stood, her voice resonating with quiet authority. Given these revelations, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO and the temporary assumption of executive authority by the board chair until new leadership can be properly established. The motion passed unanimously, Nathan not even attempting to vote against it. Victor was escorted from the room, his final glare at Miranda a promise of retribution that would never materialize. As the meeting adjourned into a stunned aftermath, Miranda approached her son, who remained seated, staring at the evidence still displayed on the screen. "It's over, Nathan," she said quietly. "All of it." He looked up, arrogance finally stripped away, leaving only the lost, hollowed expression of a man facing ruins of his own making. "How long?" Nathan's voice was a raw rasp, like stones grating together. "How long have you been preparing for this?" "Your father began preparing the day he recognized the path you were on," Miranda answered, her voice even, unyielding. "I simply finished what he started." The aftermath of the board meeting was a controlled detonation, chaos meticulously orchestrated. Board members huddled, their whispers like a rising tide of disbelief. Corporate counsel, faces slick with panic, scrambled to assess the legal fallout. Security moved with practiced efficiency, escorting Victor Thorne, pale and sweating, to a conference room where financial crimes investigators waited like silent predators. Through it all, Miranda remained the still, cold center of the storm, directing actions with an authority that echoed her past. A past Nathan now realized he hadn't known. Nathan remained in the boardroom, his world shattered around him, the opulent space now feeling like a tomb. When the last shocked face vanished and only Miranda and James remained, he finally lifted his gaze. "Who are you?" he breathed, the question a fragile ghost in the sudden quiet. "You and Dad. Who were you really?" Miranda met his eyes, a silent assessment passing between them. The time for soothing fictions had long passed, yet the full, raw truth remained buried in classified dossiers and operational reports that would never see the light of day. "Before Sinclair Motors, before you were born, your father and I served our country in ways that required certain skills," she began, her words deliberate, each one weighed. strategic thinking, risk assessment, the ability to identify threats and neutralize them before they materialized. Military? Nathan guessed, a flicker of comprehension in his dazed eyes, struggling to reconcile this new narrative with the parents he thought he knew. Special operations, James supplied from his vantage point by the door, his voice calm, steady. Your father was my commanding officer for 12 years. Your mother was our strategic operations specialist. Together they ran some of the most successful counterintelligence operations of their era. Nathan's gaze darted between them, disbelief slowly giving way to a dawning, terrifying clarity. That's how you knew about Kanov, he murmured. How you were able to plan all this. We recognize the patterns, Miranda acknowledged. When someone has been trained to identify threats and secure assets, those skills don't disappear with retirement. And Dad's heart attack, was that natural causes? He asked, the question laced with an unvoiced accusation. Miranda's voice softened, just barely. Your father had a congenital heart condition he'd managed for years. He knew his time was limited, which is why he created the contingency measures I activated today. Nathan fell silent, the weight of this revelation about the man he'd loved, absorbed into the shattered pieces of his perception. Miranda allowed him the space, understanding that such fundamental truths needed time to settle. What happens now? He finally asked, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate aftermath. Legally, several things are already in motion, Miranda explained. The Financial Crimes Unit is building their case against Victor. The board has voted to remove you as CEO and appointed an interim leadership committee until a permanent replacement is selected. The amendments you proposed have been withdrawn, and the deal with Knitov's organization will not proceed. And me? The vulnerability in Nathan's voice was a sudden sharp ache that momentarily pierced Miranda's carefully maintained composure. Despite everything, this was still her son, the infant she had cradled, the child whose nightmares she had soothed, the young man who had made Robert so fiercely proud before unchecked ambition led him astray. That depends partly on you, Nathan, she replied honestly. There will be consequences. The evidence of financial mismanagement and corporate malfeasance can't be ignored. However, we've structured the narrative to emphasize Victor's manipulation and your limited understanding of Knitov's criminal intentions. You're protecting me, he realized, a complex mixture of shame and bewildered gratitude crossing his features. Even after what I did? Even after... He couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of abandoning his mother on that rainy roadside, suddenly a burning, unspeakable shame. Not from all consequences, Miranda clarified, her gaze steady. But from complete destruction, yes. You'll never lead Sinclair Motors again. Your reputation in the business community will require years to rebuild, if it ever can be. But, with cooperation and genuine contrition, you can avoid criminal charges. The magnitude of his downfall seemed to hit Nathan all at once. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent, suppressed emotion. Miranda gave him this moment of private reckoning, understanding that sometimes rock bottom must be fully experienced before reconstruction can begin. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his expression. A hardness broken, perhaps, or a humility long absent finding its way back to the surface. I don't deserve your protection, he said quietly. Perhaps not, Miranda agreed, her tone gentle yet unflinching. But you have it nonetheless. Not because you've earned it, but because of who we are to each other. Family protects family, Nathan, even from their worst impulses. That's something your father understood deeply. James approached the table, placing a folder before Nathan. These documents require your signature. They formalize your resignation as CEO and board member of Sinclair Motors, acknowledge the financial improprieties identified today, and commit you to full cooperation with all resulting investigations. Nathan stared at the papers for a long moment before reaching for a pen. What will you do? He asked as he signed each page. Will you run the company now? No, Miranda shook her head. Sinclair Motors needs fresh leadership, someone with automotive industry experience and impeccable integrity. The board will conduct a proper search while I temporarily guide the transition. A hint of a smile touched Miranda's lips. And after that, I have other priorities to consider. It seems I'm not quite ready for the quiet retirement I thought I wanted. As Nathan completed the paperwork, Elizabeth entered the boardroom, her expression professionally neutral despite the extraordinary circumstances. The Financial Crimes Unit has finished their initial interview with Mr. Reed, she reported. They've taken him into custody based on substantial evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. They've requested a formal statement from Nathan regarding his involvement. I'll cooperate fully, Nathan said before Miranda could respond, a small but significant assertion of responsibility. Whatever they need to know, I'll tell them. Elizabeth nodded approval. That approach will significantly strengthen our position regarding your limited culpability. She turned to Miranda. The Interim Leadership Committee is assembling in the executive conference room. They've requested your presence to help stabilize the organization and address immediate concerns. Of course. Miranda gathered her materials, preparing to navigate the next phase of the day's challenges. She paused before leaving, fixing Nathan with a gaze that carried both compassion and an uncompromising expectation. We'll continue this conversation later. For now, tell the investigators the complete truth, Nathan. No more deceptions, no more evasions. He nodded, something like relief crossing his features, the paradoxical liberation that sometimes comes with having no further options for escape. In the hallway outside, Miranda briefly allowed herself to acknowledge the emotional toll of the morning. James, ever observant, noticed her momentary vulnerability. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I will be, she assured him, straightening her shoulders. This was necessary but not easy. Robert would be proud of how you handled it, James offered, his gaze soft. Strength without cruelty, consequences without destruction. Perhaps, Miranda acknowledged, her lips thin. Though I suspect even Robert couldn't have anticipated how completely our son would lose his way, or how decisively his mother would act to bring him back. As they walked toward the conference room, Miranda reflected on the day's events, not as a victory, but as the essential first step in a rehabilitation that would require months, perhaps years to complete. For Sinclair Motors, for Nathan, and for herself. The company would survive, stronger for having excised the corruption that had threatened its foundations. Nathan would face a reckoning, long overdue, with the possibility, however distant, of eventual redemption. And Miranda herself had emerged from the protective shell of retirement, reclaiming not just her authority within the company, but aspects of her true self that had remained dormant since Robert's death. What happens after the transition? James asked as they approached the conference room. Will you return to retirement? Miranda considered the question with newfound clarity. No, she decided. I think it's time for a new chapter, one that honors Robert's legacy while acknowledging that life continues to evolve. Whatever that evolution might bring, she would face it with the same strategic thinking and quiet strength that had guided her through this crisis. Nathan's cruel abandonment on that rainy road had indeed been his last mistake, not just in his scheme to control Sinclair Motors, but in his fundamental misunderstanding of exactly who his mother had always been. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation that had changed everything, Miranda stood at the window of Robert's study, her study now, reclaimed as a working space rather than a shrine. Winter had yielded to spring, the gardens below erupting with new growth that seemed an appropriate metaphor for the transformations underway. The silence in the Sinclair Motors executive suite wasn't merely the quiet of a stable company. It was the hush of an empire rebuilt. Under Miranda's interim command, the tremors of scandal had subsided, replaced by a bedrock of transparent disclosures and renewed trust. Now a new CEO, Catherine Daniels, an industry titan, whose very name resonated with integrity, stood ready to take the helm. Yet, the true battle had been fought not in boardrooms, but in the grim accounting of betrayal and the slow, arduous reclamation of trust. James, Miranda's chief of staff and silent confidant, entered, his footsteps barely disturbing the air. He placed a slim folder on her desk, the final asset recovery numbers. 87%, he announced, a rare note of satisfaction in his crisp tone. The forensic accountants traced and reclaimed nearly all of it, every cent Victor diverted. Miranda's gaze swept the figures, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Better than expected. The words were almost a whisper. And Victor, he was sentenced yesterday. 18 years for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering. No parole for 12. Her satisfaction, however, was a fragile thing, tempered by the long shadows of human wreckage. Victor's corruption, they'd discovered, had spread like a cancer, far beyond Sinclair Motors, his arrogance an impenetrable shield even as the walls closed in. Interpol apprehended him in Dubai last week, James added, a glint in his eye. The Sinclair case provided the final pieces for their international warrant. He paused, then offered a small, knowing smile. Your recordings from the Cardinal Club proved particularly valuable. Miranda acknowledged the compliment with a wry twist of her lips. Some skills, she murmured, gazing out at the city skyline, never quite disappear. Though I doubt Robert ever imagined my surveillance training would be applied to corporate malfeasance. She turned from the window, her attention drawn to another folder on her desk, this one holding a different kind of reckoning. She opened it carefully, reviewing contents she knew by heart. Nathan's counselor reports continued progress, James observed, his voice softer now, his eyes tracking her nuanced expression. 6 months of therapy, consistent attendance at the financial recovery program, maintaining sobriety. The words hung in the air, each a testament to the brutal, slow journey of healing. Nathan's gambling addiction, a raw wound exposed in the aftermath of Victor's treachery, had been a shattering revelation. What began as a desperate attempt to fill his father's immense shoes had spiraled into a destructive compulsion, meticulously exploited by Victor. Now the quiet victories of sobriety and self-discovery were beginning to emerge. And the community service? Miranda asked, her voice laced with an unspoken plea. Exemplary, James confirmed, handing her another report. His supervisor at the Veterans Center says he's been teaching financial literacy and basic automotive maintenance to returning service members. He's even requested permission to expand the program to include job placement. Miranda read the proposal, a flicker of something akin to hope in her eyes. Nathan's 500 hours with veterans, many of whom had served alongside Robert, had begun as a punitive obligation. Now it had clearly blossomed into something far more profound. Approve the expansion, she decided, already planning the funding through the Sinclair Foundation, her new compass, charting a course for veteran support and community development, a silent, enduring legacy beyond the chrome and steel of the automotive world. There's one more thing, James began, a rare hesitancy in his tone. Nathan has requested a meeting. Not here, not at headquarters. Neutral ground. He understands if you decline. Their interactions since the confrontation had been few, formal, dictated by legal necessity. The distance had been a deliberate buffer, a fragile space for seismic shifts to settle. Did he indicate the purpose? Miranda asked, her gaze unwavering. Only that it's personal, and he'd prefer to speak with you alone. Miranda's decision formed with the same swift clarity that had brought Sinclair Motors back from the brink. Arrange it, she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. The boathouse at Lakeside Park. It was always a special place for him as a child. The next afternoon, Miranda stood alone at the weathered boathouse, its wooden planks creaking softly as it stretched into the tranquil waters of the park. She'd arrived early, allowing the quiet hum of the lake to settle her thoughts, bracing herself for the fragile conversation ahead. He arrived precisely on time. Not in the luxury sedans of his past, but in a modest car that spoke of a life unburdened by superficiality. His appearance, too, had shifted. Less polished, more genuine, replacing tailored suits with casual clothes that suggested a man quietly redefining his very essence. "Thank you for coming," Nathan began, his voice edged with a formality that betrayed his uncertainty. "Of course," Miranda replied, gesturing to the worn bench overlooking the water. "This place holds good memories." They sat, Nathan's gaze drawn to the shimmering lake where Robert had taught him to sail years ago. "Dad used to say," Nathan murmured, his voice softer now, recalling a distant echo, "that the water never remembers the last boat that crossed it, that every journey starts with a clean slate. He believed in fresh starts." Miranda nodded, hearing Robert's enduring philosophy in her son's quiet words. It was the same wisdom that had made Robert such a magnetic leader. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. Nathan seemed to be gathering his courage, preparing to lay bare the truth. "I've been working with my counselor on making amends," he finally began, his voice steady despite the raw emotion beneath. "Not just empty apologies, but genuine accountability, restitution, where possible." Miranda listened, recognizing the structured language of recovery, but also sensing a deeper, more personal current. "What I did to you that day on the road, abandoning you in the rain, trying to teach you a lesson." He shook his head, a fresh wave of self-disgust washing over his features. "There's no adequate apology for that cruelty. It revealed a darkness in me that I'm still working to understand, to overcome." "We all have capacities for darkness, Nathan," Miranda said quietly, her voice a soothing balm. "What matters is recognizing them and choosing differently moving forward." "That's what I'm trying to do," he acknowledged, his eyes meeting hers directly, the defensive walls of their past gone. "Choose differently, see clearly, understand the reality I've been avoiding for so long. I've spent my life trying to be the son I thought Dad wanted, ambitious, successful, in control. I never understood what he truly valued until I'd almost destroyed everything he built." An unexpected surge of compassion welled within Miranda. "Your father was immensely proud of you, Nathan, not for your achievements or your position, but for the moments when your character truly shone. Your determination rebuilding that old Mustang, your kindness to James's nephew after deployment, your genuine enthusiasm explaining engine mechanics to younger employees." Nathan absorbed her words, a visible tremor of emotion passing through him. "I lost sight of that person somewhere along the way." "Perhaps," Miranda agreed gently, "but people can be found again, if the search is sincere." From his pocket, Nathan withdrew a small worn object, the Sinclair Motors key fob Robert had given him on his 16th birthday, a cherished talisman he'd carried through all his adult life. "I haven't felt worthy of carrying this," he confessed, holding it out. "But I keep it as a reminder of what integrity looks like, of the standard I'm working toward, even knowing I may never fully reach it." Miranda recognized the gesture not as a plea for his old life, but as an acknowledgement of shattered values and a quiet vow to reclaim them. "Your father believed in redemption," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Not the easy kind that comes from words alone, but the earned kind that emerges from sustained effort and genuine change." "And you?" Nathan asked, his vulnerability laid bare. "What do you believe is possible between us now?" Miranda considered this, weighing each word, honoring the enormity of the moment. "I believe healing is possible, though not instant trust. Once broken, it must be rebuilt deliberately, through consistent actions, transparent communication, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths." "I'd like to try," Nathan said simply, his gaze unwavering. "However long it takes, whatever form it eventually takes." As they sat together watching sunlight dance across the water, Miranda reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The company Robert had built was secure, guided by new leadership committed to his founding principles. The son who had almost shattered that legacy was now engaged in the difficult work of redemption, showing glimmers of the man he was destined to become. And she, Miranda, had emerged from the protective cocoon of widowhood, stepping into a new chapter defined not by passive grief, but by active purpose. "There's something else I've been meaning to tell you," she said, as they prepared to leave, the words a silent promise of future conversations. "Something about your foundation work," Nathan suggested, the question hanging in the air like a hesitant challenge. "The veteran programs? I've heard they're making a significant impact." Miranda offered a faint, knowing smile. "Yes, but it's more specific. I'm launching a new initiative, a rehabilitation center." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "It's for veterans struggling with gambling addiction and financial distress, issues that, as you know, disproportionately affect those returning from service." Her gaze held his unwavering. "We've secured the funding, the location, but we're still mapping out the program structure, identifying the right instructors." A flicker of understanding crossed Nathan's face, a slow dawn. "You think I might have something to contribute?" It wasn't a question, but a dawning realization. Miranda nodded, a quiet affirmation. "When you're ready, Nathan. Your experience, the destructive choices, yes, but more importantly, the painful, meticulous process of recovery, that perspective is invaluable. It could resonate deeply with others facing similar struggles." She watched him, measuring his reaction. Not now, perhaps not soon, but eventually it could be something to work toward. He felt the possibility register deep within him, a strange duality of challenge and gleaming opportunity. It was a potential path that honored his ongoing recovery, offering a way to forge meaning from the darkest chapters of his past. The stiff formality that had prefaced their meeting had softened, dissolving into something more authentic as they parted. It wasn't the easy intimacy they had once shared, but a careful, deliberate reconnection built on a clearer, harder-won understanding of who they both truly were. Miranda watched his car disappear, a distant hum fading into the afternoon. She knew their relationship, much like Sinclair Motors itself, would never return to what it had been. Yet, she found herself wondering if what emerged from the ruins, the new structure, born of dust and determination, might not prove stronger, more authentic, and more enduring than the old. That evening, in the quiet solitude of Robert's study, Miranda's fingers found the hidden catch on his old desk. The secret compartment, once a cache for contingency plans and emergency provisions, now held something else entirely: a leather-bound journal. Within its pages, she had begun charting this unexpected new chapter of her life, meticulously preserving the hard-won wisdom of crisis for anyone who might one day need it. On the last blank page, her pen moved with a decisive grace. "Nathan abandoned me in the rain, believing he was teaching me about power," she wrote. "Instead, his cruelty became his last mistake, the catalyst that forced me to reclaim not just control of Sinclair Motors, but aspects of myself I had set aside for too long." Sometimes our greatest challenges arrive disguised as cruel moments that initially appear to diminish us. The test lies not in avoiding such moments, but in how we rise to meet them, with strength tempered by wisdom, justice balanced with mercy, and the courage to protect what matters without surrendering to bitterness in the process. She closed the journal with a soft click, returning it to its secure place. Outside her window, the meticulously tended gardens Robert had designed continued their silent, ancient cycle of renewal. Each season ushered in its own unique beauty, its own inherent purpose, its own fresh opportunity for growth. Like those resilient gardens, life itself continued to evolve in patterns both anticipated and astonishing. constantly offering new possibilities to those prepared to see them, to embrace them. The rain had long since passed. What remained was the sharp clarity that only a storm can bring, and the quiet, potent promise of new growth in ground made fertile by hardship.